The apartment felt smaller tonight, charged with an electricity that made Kyle Wood's skin hum with nervous energy. He sat on the edge of the couch, watching John Taylor pace between the kitchen and living room, running his hands through his dark hair in that way that meant he was wrestling with something big. The dinner plate still sat on the coffee table between them, forgotten remnants of what had started as a simple request to eat together and had somehow transformed into something that felt monumental. John stopped pacing and turned to face him. Those green eyes that Kyle had memorized in 1,000 stolen glances now focused entirely on him with an intensity that made his breath catch. There was something different in John's expression tonight. Something vulnerable and desperate and terrifyingly hopeful that Kyle had never seen before. "I need to tell you something," John said, his voice barely above a whisper. "And I'm scared as hell to say it, but I think I'll lose my mind if I don't." Kyle's heart hammered against his ribs as John moved closer, close enough that he could smell his cologne, that familiar scent that had been driving him crazy for months, close enough to see the way John's hands trembled slightly at his sides. "Kyle, I think I've been lying to myself for a long time about what I want, about who I am." John's voice cracked on the last word, and Kyle felt something shift in the air between them, like a door opening that neither of them could close again. Before we see how this ends, tell us where you are watching from and hype this video in the comments. But to understand how they arrived at this moment, how a simple dinner invitation had unraveled years of careful pretense and hidden longing, we need to go back to where it all began. 3 months earlier, Kyle had been sitting in this same spot on the couch, laptop balanced on his knees, trying to focus on his graduate thesis while John complained about his latest dating disaster. It had become their routine, these late-night conversations where John would dissect his relationships with women who never seemed to quite fit, never seemed to understand him the way he needed to be understood. "She's beautiful," John had said that night, sprawled in the armchair across from him, beer bottle dangling from his fingers. "Smart, funny, great job. On paper, she's perfect." Kyle had looked up from his screen, noting the way John's brow furrowed, the dissatisfaction that seemed to radiate from him despite listing all of Sarah's positive qualities. But I feel like I'm playing a role when I'm with her, like I'm this guy who's supposed to want certain things, supposed to feel a certain way, and I just don't." John had taken a long pull from his beer, staring at the ceiling. "Does that make me a terrible person?" Kyle had closed his laptop then, giving John his full attention the way he always did it when these conversations turned serious. "No, it makes you human. Maybe she's just not the right person for you." "Maybe," John had agreed, but there had been something in his tone that suggested the problem went deeper than one incompatible relationship. "Sometimes I wonder if I even know what I'm looking for." That conversation had planted a seed of something Kyle didn't dare name, a tiny flutter of possibility that he'd immediately tried to repress. John was his roommate, his friend, and most importantly, he was straight. Kyle had learned to live with the ache of wanting someone he couldn't have, had become an expert at offering relationship advice, while his own heart twisted with each detail of John's romantic failures. The pattern had continued for weeks. John would go on dates, come home frustrated and confused, and Kyle would listen with the patience of someone who had no choice but to watch the person he loved search for happiness in all the wrong places. Each conversation felt like a knife turning in his chest, but Kyle endured it because being John's confidant was better than being nothing to him at all. The shift had started small, so subtle that Kyle had almost missed it. John began asking different questions during their late-night talks, questions that made Kyle's pulse quicken even as he tried to dismiss them as meaningless. "Do you think some people are just wired differently when it comes to attraction?" John had asked one night, seemingly out of nowhere. Kyle had been making coffee, grateful for the excuse to keep his back turned so John couldn't see his face. "What do you mean?" "I don't know, like maybe some people need different things to feel connected to someone. Maybe the whole traditional dating thing just doesn't work for everyone." Kyle had forced his voice to remain steady as he'd replied, "I think people are more complex than society wants them to be. Connection isn't one size fits all." He turned around to find John watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. something thoughtful and searching that had made Kyle's stomach flip. The moment had stretched between them, loaded with unspoken questions, before John had looked away and changed the subject. But the questions had kept coming, each one more pointed than the last. John had started asking about Kyle's own experiences, about what it felt like to be attracted to men, about how Kyle had known he was gay. Kyle had answered as honestly as he could while trying to ignore the way John hung on every word, the way he leaned forward during these conversations as if he were trying to solve some internal puzzle. "Did you always know?" John had asked one evening while they'd cooked dinner together, their usual easy rhythm in the kitchen somehow charged with new tension. Kyle had considered the question as he'd chopped vegetables, hyper-aware of John's presence beside him at the stove. "Not always. I mean, I had feelings before I had words for them. It took time to understand what they meant." "What was it like, the first time you really knew for sure?" Kyle had glanced up to find John watching him intently, and something in that gaze had made his breath catch. There had been a hunger there, a desperate kind of curiosity that went beyond academic interest. "Terrifying," Takakio had admitted, "but also like everything suddenly made sense. Like I'd been trying to force puzzle pieces together that were never meant to fit, and suddenly I found the right picture." John had gone quiet after that, focusing on the pasta with unusual intensity, but Kyle had caught him stealing glances throughout the evening, as if he were seeing him in a new light. The physical changes had been even more subtle at first. John had always been casually affectionate, the kind of friend who thought nothing of draping an arm around Kyle's shoulders during movies or bumping their knees together on the couch. But lately those touches had begun to linger. A hand on Kyle's shoulder would stay a moment too long. Their legs would brush during their evening talks, and neither would move away. Kyle had tried to tell himself he was imagining things, that his own desperate longing was making him see signs that weren't there. But then John had started finding excuses to be close to him, appearing in the kitchen whenever Kyle was cooking, sitting closer on the couch during their conversations, always seeming to orbit into Kyle's personal space as if drawn by some invisible force. The breaking point had come 2 weeks ago, during what should have been an ordinary evening. They'd been watching a movie, some action thriller, that Kyle couldn't have summarized if his life depended on it, because all his attention had been focused on the way John kept shifting closer, the way their shoulders pressed together, the way John's breathing seemed to synchronize with his own. Halfway through the film, John had turned to him and asked, completely out of nowhere, "Have you ever wondered what it would be like to kiss someone you weren't supposed to want?" Kyle's heart had stopped. Actually stopped, he was sure of it, because the silence that followed felt eternal and airless. John had been looking at him with those green eyes that seemed to see straight through him, and Kyle had known with absolute certainty that they weren't talking about the movie anymore. "I think most people have wondered about things they're not supposed to want," Kyle had managed to say, his voice barely steady. "Even if it could change everything? Especially then." John had stared at him for a long moment, something shifting in his expression, before turning back to the screen without another word. But the air between them had remained charged for the rest of the evening, full of unspoken possibilities and dangerous questions. That night had changed something fundamental between them. John had become more withdrawn over the following days, disappearing into his room earlier than usual, avoiding their typical late-night conversations. Kyle had caught him watching him sometimes, quick glances that John would look away from when their eyes met, as if he'd been caught doing something he shouldn't. Kyle had given him space, even though the distance felt like agony. He'd thrown himself into his thesis work, spent more time at the library, tried to give John room to figure out whatever he was wrestling with. But the apartment had felt hollow without their easy camaraderie, without the comfortable rhythm they'd built over months of living together. Which was why John's request tonight had caught him so off guard. Kyle had been heating up leftover Chinese food when John had appeared in the kitchen doorway, looking nervous and determined in equal measure. "Would you want to eat together tonight?" John had asked, the question simple enough, but loaded with something that made Kyle's pulse quicken. "I mean actually eat together at the table like a proper dinner." Kyle had looked up from the microwave, studying John's face for clues about what this meant. "Sure, is everything okay?" "Yeah, I just..." John had run his hand through his hair, that nervous gesture Kyle had come to recognize. I feel like we haven't talked much lately. I miss it. I miss talking to you. So they'd set the table with actual plates instead of eating from takeout containers on the couch. John had opened a bottle of wine, something nicer than their usual beer, and they'd sat across from each other in the small dining area that they'd barely used since Kyle had moved in. The conversation had started normally enough, catching up on work and classes, the kind of surface-level chat that felt safe. But as the wine had relaxed them both, John had begun asking those probing questions again, the ones that made Kyle feel like he was walking a tightrope without a net. Do you ever regret being honest about who you are? John had asked, twirling noodles around his fork and without eating them. Kyle had considered the question carefully. Sometimes it would be easier to pretend, to take the path everyone expects. But living a lie is exhausting. It's like being a ghost in your own life. A ghost in your own life, John had repeated softly. That's exactly what it feels like sometimes. The admission had hung between them, heavy with implication. Kyle had wanted to reach across the table, to take John's hand and tell him that whatever he was feeling was okay, that he didn't have to have all the answers right away. But he'd held back, afraid of pushing too hard, afraid of scaring John away again. John, he'd started carefully, you know you can talk to me about anything, right? Whatever you're going through, you don't have to figure it out alone. John had looked up then, meeting his eyes directly for the first time in all evening. What if what I'm figuring out changes everything between us? What if it changes everything for the better? The question had seemed to unlock something in John. He'd pushed back from the table abruptly, beginning the pacing that had led them to this moment, to John standing in front of him with trembling hands and desperate eyes, finally ready to voice what had been building between them for weeks. Kyle, I think I've been lying to myself for a long time about what I want, about who I am, John had said, and Kyle had felt the world tilt on its axis. Now, sitting on the couch with John close enough to touch, Kyle waited for whatever came next. His heart hammered so loudly he was sure John could hear it, but he forced himself to remain still, to let John find his words without pressure or expectation. I keep thinking about that night we talked about kissing someone you're not supposed to want, John continued, his voice gaining strength even as his hands shook. I haven't been able to stop thinking about it. About you. Kyle's breath caught. John, no, let me say this before I lose my nerve. John moved closer, close enough that Kyle could see the flecks of gold in his green eyes. I've been trying to figure out why none of my relationships work, why I always feel like something's missing. And I think it's because I've been looking for something in the wrong places, in the wrong people. Kyle's heart felt like it might burst from his chest. What are you saying? I'm saying that when I imagine what I want, what would make me happy, it's not some perfect woman I've never met. It's you. It's always been you. And I was too scared to admit it to myself. The words hit Kyle like a physical force, like stepping into sunlight after months in darkness. He dreamed of this moment so many times that it felt surreal to be living it, to see the truth reflected in John's eyes. How long? Kyle asked softly. I don't know, maybe always, but I was too afraid to let myself see it. John's voice dropped to a whisper. I think I fell in love with you before I even understood what that meant, and I've been running from it ever since. Kyle stood then, unable to remain still any longer. John was so close, close enough that Kyle could feel the warmth radiating from his skin, could see the way John's lips parted slightly as he breathed. I've been in love with you for 8 months, Kyle confessed, the words tumbling out now that the dam had finally broken. Since the night you fell asleep on my shoulder during that terrible horror movie marathon. I've been dying inside, watching you date other people, giving you advice about relationships when all I wanted was to tell you that what you were looking for was right here. John's eyes widened, something like wonder crossing his features. 8 months? 8 months of pretending I was okay with just being your friend. 8 months of listening to you talk about other people when I wanted to be the person you came home to. 8 months of falling asleep wishing things could be different. Kyle, I'm so sorry. I never meant to hurt you. You didn't hurt me. You couldn't help how you felt any more than I could. Kyle reached up, his fingers barely grazing John's cheek. But if you're saying what I think you're saying, I'm saying I want to try. I'm saying I'm terrified, but I can't keep pretending anymore. I'm saying that when I think about my future, about what I want my life to look like, you're in every single picture. Kyle felt tears prick at his eyes, overwhelmed by the magnitude of John's words, by the courage it must have taken to say them. Are you sure? Because once we cross this line, we can't go back. We can't pretend it didn't happen. I don't want to go back, John said firmly. I want to go forward. With you. The space between them seemed to crackle with electricity. Kyle could feel John's breath on his face, could see the way John's gaze dropped to his lips and lingered there. Can I kiss you? John asked, his voice barely audible. Kyle's answer was to close the distance between them, to press his lips to John's in a kiss that was soft and tentative at first, a question being asked and answered. But as John responded, as his hands came up to frame Kyle's face, the kiss deepened into something desperate and hungry, months of suppressed longing pouring out in the connection of their mouths. Kyle had imagined this moment countless times, but the reality was so much more than his fantasies had ever captured. The way John kissed him like he was drowning and Kyle was air. The way John's hands trembled against his skin. The small sound John made when Kyle's tongue brushed against his lower lip. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, John rested his forehead against Kyle's, his eyes still closed. Wow, John whispered. Yeah, wow. That felt right. John opened his eyes then, meeting Kyle's gaze with an intensity that made Kyle's knees weak. So right. Like everything I've been searching for was right here all along. Kyle cupped John's face in his hands, thumbs brushing across his cheekbones. It was. I was always right here, waiting for you to see me. I see you now, John said fiercely. I see you and I love you, and I'm sorry it took me so long to be brave enough to admit it. You're brave enough, well, that's all that matters. John kissed him again, softer this time, but no less meaningful. When they separated, John's smile was radiant, transforming his entire face. So what happens now? John asked. Kyle smiled back, feeling lighter than he had in months. Now we figure it out together, one day at a time. I'd like that. John's expression grew more serious. I know this is all new for me, and I might not always know what I'm doing. I might need patience while I figure out how to be in this kind of relationship. I've waited 8 months for you to figure out your feelings, Kyle said gently. I think I can handle waiting a little longer while you figure out everything else. What about Sarah? I need to officially end things with her. We'll deal with that. We'll deal with all of it. Kyle took John's hands in his, intertwining their fingers. But right now, can we just be happy about this? Can we just enjoy the fact that we both finally said what we've been feeling? John squeezed his hands, that brilliant smile returning. Yeah, we can do that. They settled back onto the couch, John pulling Kyle against his side with a naturalness that spoke to how right this felt. Kyle tucked his head into the curve of John's shoulder, breathing in that familiar scent that now carried new meaning. I keep thinking this is a dream, John murmured, pressing a kiss to the top of Kyle's head. If it is, I don't want to wake up. Me neither. John's arms tightened around him. Kyle, thank you for being patient with me, for waiting while I figure it myself out. Kyle lifted his head to look at John, seeing the vulnerability in his eyes, the gratitude and wonder and love all mixed together. You were worth waiting for. They stayed like that for a long time, wrapped up in each other on the couch, talking quietly about everything and nothing. John asked more questions about Kyle's experiences, about what it had been like growing up gay, about the challenges Kyle had faced in accepting himself. Kyle answered honestly, holding nothing back now that the barriers between them had finally fallen. I wish I'd figured this out sooner, John said at one point, his fingers tracing patterns on Kyle's arm. I wish I hadn't wasted so much time trying to force myself into relationships that were never going to work. You weren't wasting time, Kyle assured him. You were learning about yourself, about what you didn't want. That's just as important as knowing what you do want. I know what I want now, John said with quiet certainty. I want you. I want this. I want to wake up next to you and come home to you and build something real together. The words sent warmth flooding through Kyle's chest. I want that too. I've wanted it for so long. Then let's have it, John said simply. Let's stop being afraid and just have what we want. Kyle shifted to face him fully, studying the determined set of John's jaw, the love shining in his eyes. Are you sure you're ready for this? For everything it means? I'm sure I don't want to spend another day pretending to be someone I'm not, John replied. I'm sure I don't want to waste any more time being scared of the best thing that's ever happened to me. Kyle felt his throat tighten with emotion. You really mean that? I've never meant anything more. John cupped Kyle's face in his hands, thumb stroking across his cheekbones. I love you, Kyle. Not as a friend, not as a roommate, but as the person I want to spend my life with. And I know that's probably moving too fast, but I can't help how I feel. It's not too fast, Kyle whispered. I've been ready for this for 8 months, remember? John laughed, the sound bright and free. Right, I guess I'm the one who needs to catch up. We have time, Kyle said, all the time in the world. John kissed him again, slow and deep, and Kyle marveled at how different it felt from their first kiss just an hour ago. Where that had been desperate and hungry, this was certain and claiming, a promise being made with lips and tongue and breath. When they broke apart, John rested his forehead against Kyle's again, both of them breathing hard. I should probably call Sarah tomorrow, John said reluctantly, end things officially. Kyle nodded, trying not to feel guilty about the relief that flooded through him. How do you think she'll take it? I think she already knows something's off between us. She's been asking if there's someone else, and I kept denying it because I didn't want to admit the truth to myself. John's expression grew thoughtful. But there has been someone else. There's been you. I'm sorry if this complicates things with her. Don't be sorry. This is the first time in my life I've felt completely honest about my feelings. That's not something to apologize for. They talked until nearly 3 in the morning, covering everything from practical concerns about their living situation to deeper questions about what their relationship would look like going forward. John was full of curiosity about gay culture, about the community Kyle was part of, about what it would mean for him to step into that world. Will your friends accept me? John asked at one point, vulnerability creeping into his voice. They'll love you, Kyle assured him, especially once they see how happy you make me. Do I make you happy? Kyle looked at him in amazement. John, you make me happier than I ever thought possible. Even before tonight, just being your friend, being close to you in any way I could made me happy. This is like winning the lottery. John's smile was soft and wondering. I can't believe I almost missed this. I can't believe I almost let my fear keep me from the best thing in my life. But you didn't miss it. You're here now. We're here now. We're here now, John repeated as if testing the words. I like the sound of that. Eventually, exhaustion began to creep in, but neither of them wanted to break the spell of the evening by going to their separate rooms. They'd crossed too many lines tonight to go back to the careful distance they'd maintained before. Stay with me tonight? Kyle asked softly. Just to sleep. I just want to wake up knowing this wasn't all a dream. John's answer was to stand and pull Kyle up with him, leading him toward Kyle's bedroom with a naturalness that spoke to how right this felt between them. They fell asleep curled together in Kyle's bed, John's arms wrapped securely around him, and Kyle couldn't remember the last time he'd felt so completely at peace. Kyle woke to sunlight streaming through his bedroom windows, and the unfamiliar but wonderful sensation of John's warm body, pressed against his back. For a moment he lay still, afraid to move and break the spell, afraid that shifting would wake John and force them both to face the reality of what had changed between them. But then John stirred behind him, arms tightening around Kyle's waist, and Kyle heard a soft, contented sigh that made his heart flutter. Morning, John murmured against the back of Kyle's neck, his voice rough with sleep. Morning, Kyle replied, unable to keep the smile out of his voice. Sleep well? Better than I have in months. John pressed a gentle kiss to Kyle's shoulder. You? Like a baby. Kyle turned in John's arms, meeting those green eyes that looked even more beautiful in the morning light. Any regrets? John's expression grew serious as he considered the question. Only that it took me so long to get here. What about you? My only regret is that we can't go back and do last night over again, because it was perfect and I want to experience it for the first time again. John's smile was radiant. We'll have plenty of other perfect nights. This is just the beginning. They lay there for a while longer, trading soft kisses and quiet conversation, neither wanting to break the intimate bubble they'd created. But eventually, the demands of the day intruded, and they reluctantly disentangled themselves to face the morning routine. Kyle watched John pad to the bathroom in his boxers and t-shirt, marveling at how domestic and right it felt to have him there. When John emerged a few minutes later, hair tousled and face freshly washed, Kyle felt his breath catch at how beautiful he looked in the morning light. "What?" John asked, catching Kyle's stare. "Nothing, just admiring the view." John blushed, a sight that Kyle found absolutely endearing. "I'm not used to being looked at like that by someone whose opinion I care about." "You'd better get used to it," Kyle said, moving closer to wrap his arms around John's waist. "Because I plan to look at you like that for a very long time." John leaned into the embrace, resting his head on Kyle's shoulder. "I love you," he said softly, as if testing out the words in the light of day. "I love you too." They made breakfast together, falling into an easy rhythm that felt both new and familiar. John was more tactile than usual, finding excuses to brush against Kyle as they moved around the kitchen, to touch his hand when passing him the coffee, to press a quick kiss to his cheek when Kyle made him laugh. "I feel like I'm seeing everything differently today," John said as they sat at the table with their eggs and toast. "Like the whole world has shifted somehow." "That's what happens when you stop pretending to be someone you're not," Kyle observed. "Everything becomes more vivid, more real." "Is that how it was for you when you came out?" Kyle considered the question as he sipped his coffee. "It was different for me because I was younger and I didn't have as much to lose. But yeah, there was definitely a sense of everything clicking into place, of finally being able to breathe properly." "I feel like I can breathe properly for the first time in years," John admitted. "I didn't even realize how much energy I was spending trying to force myself to feel things I didn't feel." "What's the hardest part going to be?" Kyle asked gently. "Moving forward, I mean." John was quiet for a long moment, considering. "Telling people, I think. My family, my coworkers, my friends. I've spent 30 years building an identity around being straight, and now I have to figure out how to be honest about who I really am." "You don't have to do it all at once," Kyle reminded him, "and you don't have to do it alone. Will you help me when it's time to tell people about us?" The word "us" sent a thrill through Kyle that he tried not to let show too obviously on his face. "Of course, we'll figure it out together. Remember?" John reached across the table to take Kyle's hand, intertwining their fingers. "I keep saying that, don't I? Figure it out together." "I like it. It sounds like a plan." "It is a plan, the only plan that matters." After breakfast, John did call Sarah. Kyle gave him privacy for the conversation, retreating to his room to work on his thesis. But he could hear John's voice through the thin walls, calm and gentle, but firm. The call lasted about 20 minutes, and when John knocked on Kyle's door afterward, his expression was a mixture of relief and sadness. "How did it go?" Kyle asked, closing his laptop and giving John his full attention. "Better than I expected, actually. I think she knew something was up. She said she'd been feeling like I was holding back, like there was something I wasn't telling her." "Did you tell her about us?" John nodded. "I told her I'd realized I wasn't straight and that I'd fallen in love with someone else. She asked if it was you." Kyle's eyebrows rose. "She asked if it was me. Apparently, I haven't been as subtle as I thought. She said she'd noticed the way I talked about you, the way I lit up when I mentioned your name. She said she'd been wondering for a while if there was something there." "Wow. I'm sorry if that was awkward." "It wasn't, really. She was hurt, obviously, but she said she'd rather know the truth than keep pretending everything was fine when it wasn't." John sat down on the bed next to Kyle. "She wished us well, said she hoped I'd found what I was looking for." "That was generous of her." "It was. I think she's a good person who deserves someone who can love her the way she deserves to be loved. And that's not me." Kyle reached for John's hand, squeezing gently. "How are you feeling about it?" "Sad for her because I know I hurt her even though I didn't mean to, but also relieved and free." John met Kyle's eyes. "For the first time in my life, I feel completely free to be myself." "And who is that exactly?" Kyle asked with a soft smile. "Someone who's in love with his roommate." Someone who's finally brave enough to go after what he wants instead of what he thinks he should want. Kyle leaned over to kiss him, slow and sweet. I like that person very much. Good, because he's not going anywhere. They spent the rest of the day in a bubble of domestic bliss, doing ordinary things that felt extraordinary because they were doing them together as a couple. They went grocery shopping, John's hand finding Kyle's in the produce aisle without conscious thought. They cleaned the apartment, working side by side while music played, John spinning Kyle around in the living room when a particularly romantic song came on. We're being ridiculously domestic, John observed as they folded laundry together that evening. Is that a problem? The opposite. I love it. I love how normal this feels. How right. John shook out one of Kyle's shirts, studying it with a small smile. I love that your clothes are going to be mixed in with mine in the dresser. They already are in the hamper. That's different, and that was just practical. This is intentional. Kyle understood the distinction. Everything they did now carried new weight, new meaning. They weren't just roommates sharing space. They were partners, building a life together. That evening, they settled on the couch to watch a movie, Kyle curled against John's side in a position that had once been casual and was now loaded with significance. John's fingers played absently with Kyle's hair, and Kyle marveled at how such a simple touch could feel so intimate, so claiming. Can I ask you something? John said during a quiet moment into the film. Anything. What made you fall in love with me? I mean, specifically. What was it that made you realize your feelings had changed from friendship to something more? Kyle considered the question, thinking back to those early days when his feelings had begun to shift without him fully understanding what was happening. It wasn't one moment, he said slowly. It was 1,000 little things. The way you made coffee for me every morning without being asked. The way you listened when I talked about my thesis, really listened, not just waiting for your turn to speak. The way you worried about me when I was stressed, brought me food when I forgot to eat. John's hand stilled in his hair. Those are just things friends do. Maybe, but it was more than that. It was the way you looked at me when you thought I wasn't paying attention, like you were trying to figure something out. It was the way you always seemed to gravitate toward me in a room full of people. It was the way you made me feel like the most important person in your world, even when you were dating someone else. You were the most important person in my world, John said quietly. I just didn't understand what that meant. When did you realize, Kyle asked? When did you know your feelings had changed? John was quiet for a long moment, his fingers resuming their gentle movement through Kyle's hair. I think it was about 6 weeks ago, he said finally. I was on a date with your friend Sarah, and she was telling me about something that had happened at work, and all I could think about was how I wished I was home with you instead. Not because the date was going badly, but because being with you felt more real than being with her. Kyle's heart clenched at the admission. I started paying attention to my feelings after that, really paying attention. And I realized that you were the person I wanted to share good news with, the person I wanted to comfort me when I was upset, the person I thought about when I woke up and when I went to sleep. But you pulled away from me after that, because I was scared, John admitted. I'd never felt that way about a man before, and I didn't know what to do with it. I thought if I put some distance between us, the feelings would go away. But they didn't. They got stronger. Every day I tried to avoid you, I missed you more. And then that night we talked about kissing someone you're not supposed to want. I realized I wasn't talking hypothetically anymore. I was talking about you. Kyle shifted to look up at John, seeing the vulnerability in his expression, the courage it had taken to be so honest. I'm glad you stopped and running, Kyle said softly. Me too. Best decision I ever made. They finished the movie in comfortable silence, both lost in their own thoughts about how much had changed in such a short time. When the credits rolled, neither made a move to get up, content to stay wrapped up in each other. Kyle, John said eventually. I know we said we'd take this one day at a time, but I need you to know something. This isn't casual for me. This isn't an experiment or a phase. This is me choosing you, choosing us, for as long as you'll have me. Kyle felt his throat tighten with emotion. John, I know it's early to be saying things like this, but I can't help how I feel. I love you, and I want to build a real life with you. I want to introduce you to my family as my partner. I want to wake up next to you every morning and come home to you every night. I want all of it. Kyle sat up fully, turning to face John completely. Are you sure? Because once we start down that path, there's no going back. People will know. Your family, your coworkers, everyone will know that you're in love with a man. Let them know, John said fiercely. I'm tired of hiding who I am. I'm tired of pretending to be someone I'm not just to make other people comfortable. It won't be easy. Some people won't understand. Some people might not accept it. Then those aren't the kind of people I want in my life anyway. John cupped Kyle's face in his hands. I'd rather have a difficult truth than an easy lie. I'd rather face the world honestly with you than live another day pretending to be straight. Kyle felt tears prick at his eyes, overwhelmed by the depth of John's conviction, by the love shining in his eyes. I love you so much, Kyle whispered. I love you so much it scares me sometimes. Don't be scared, John said gently. We're going to be okay. Better than okay. We're going to be happy. Promise, I promise I'll fight for us every day. I promise I'll never make you doubt how much you mean to me. I promise I'll spend the rest of my life proving that you were worth the wait. Kyle launched himself forward, capturing John's lips in a kiss that was desperate and grateful and full of love. John caught him easily, arms coming around him to hold him close, and Kyle marveled at how perfectly they fit together, how right this felt. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, John rested his forehead against Kyle's. So what do you say? John asked softly. Ready to figure out forever together? Kyle smiled, feeling lighter and happier than he had in his entire life. I've been ready since the day I met you. 3 months later, Kyle stood in the kitchen making coffee, humming softly to himself as morning sunlight streamed through the windows. The apartment felt different now, warmer somehow, filled with the easy contentment that came from living authentically. John's coffee mug sat next to his on the counter, a small thing that never failed to make Kyle smile. Morning, beautiful, John said, appearing in the doorway with his hair still mussed from sleep and wearing one of Kyle's t-shirts that he'd claimed as his own weeks ago. Morning yourself, Kyle replied, turning to accept the kiss John pressed to his lips, as natural as breathing now. Sleep well? Always do when you're there. John smiled, wrapping his arms around Kyle from behind as Kyle finished preparing their coffee. I love our mornings, John murmured against Kyle's neck. Even when you have to get up early for work? Especially then. Means I get extra time with you before the day starts. Kyle leaned back into the embrace, marveling at how domestic and right this felt. They'd fallen into rhythm so naturally that it felt like they'd been together for years instead of months. Your mom called yesterday while you were in class, John said, accepting his coffee gratefully. She wanted to confirm that we're both coming to dinner on Sunday. Kyle smiled. John's integration into his family had been seamless, his parents immediately taking to John's warmth and obvious devotion to their son. What did you tell her? That we wouldn't miss it. She's making that lasagna you like. She's making that lasagna you like, Kyle corrected. I think she likes you better than me now. Impossible, but I do appreciate how welcoming they've been. Kyle's expression grew more serious. What about your parents? Have you thought any more about when you want to tell them? John was quiet for a moment, sipping his coffee as he considered the question. They'd been having this conversation in pieces for weeks, John, working up the courage to come out to his more conservative family. I think I'm ready, John said finally. I was thinking maybe next weekend, I could drive up there, talk to them in person. Do you want me to come with you? Would you? I know it's a lot to ask, but I think it would be easier with you there. You make me braver. Kyle set down his coffee and turned to face John fully. Of course I'll come with you. We're in this together, remember? John's smile was soft and grateful. I love you. I love you too. And John, whatever happens with your parents, it doesn't change anything between us. You know that, right? I know, but I hope they can see how happy you make me. I hope they can understand that this is the most honest I've ever been about who I am. Kyle reached up to cup John's face, thumb brushing across his cheekbone. They will. It might take time, but they will. Because anyone who loves you will want to see you happy, and you're happier now than you have ever been. I am, John agreed, leaning into the touch. Happier than I ever thought possible. They finished their breakfast in comfortable companionship, John reading the news on his phone while Kyle graded papers from his teaching assistant position. The easy domesticity of it never failed to fill Kyle with contentment. This simple pleasure of sharing morning routines with the person he loved. I have to head to campus early today, Kyle said eventually, gathering his papers. Faculty meeting before my first class. I'll drive you, John offered, as he did most mornings now. You don't have to, I can take the bus. I want to, gives me an excuse to kiss you goodbye properly. Kyle laughed. You don't need an excuse for that. Maybe not, but I like having one anyway. They drove to campus together, John's hand resting on Kyle's thigh, music playing softly on the radio. At a red light, John turned to look at Kyle, expression soft and wondering. What? Kyle asked, recognizing that look. Nothing, just thinking about how different everything is now. How much better. Better than what? Better than when I was trying to be someone I wasn't. Better than when I was scared to want what I wanted. John's hand squeezed Kyle's leg gently. Better than when I was too afraid to tell you I loved you. Kyle felt his heart flutter, the same way it did every time John said those words. He didn't think he'd ever get tired of hearing them. I'm glad you got brave, Kyle said softly. Me too. Best decision I ever made. John walked Kyle to his building, as had become their habit, stealing a quick kiss before Kyle headed inside. Kyle watched through the glass doors as John walked back to his car, noting the easy confidence in his posture, the way he smiled at strangers he passed. John had blossomed over these past months, becoming more himself than Kyle had ever seen him. The faculty meeting was routine, but Kyle found his attention drifting to thoughts of John, of the life they were building together. His advisor, Dr. Christina Jimenez, noticed his distraction afterward. You seem happy lately, she observed as they walked to Kyle's office together. Things going well with your thesis? Very well, but I think the happiness is more personal than academic. Christina smiled knowingly. Ah, the roommate situation worked out then? Kyle had mentioned John to Christina before, though he had been careful not to reveal too much about his feelings until recently. You could say that. I'm glad. You deserve to be happy, Kyle. You've worked hard for it. Kyle thought about that as he prepared for his first class of the day. He had worked hard for this happiness, had waited patiently while John figured himself out, had been brave enough to be vulnerable when the moment came. But more than that, he'd been honest about who he was and what he wanted, even when it was difficult. His phone buzzed with a text from John. Thinking about you. Can't wait to come home tonight. Kyle smiled, typing back, Me too. Love you. Love you more. It was a silly exchange, the kind of thing couples texted each other dozens of times a day, but it filled Kyle with warmth. This was what he'd dreamed of during all those months of pining, this easy intimacy, this certainty that he was loved in return. That evening, Kyle came home to find John in the kitchen, cooking dinner with music playing and wearing an apron that read, Kiss the Cook, that Kyle had bought him as a joke. The sight made Kyle's heart swell with affection. Smells amazing, Kyle said, dropping his bag and moving to wrap his arms around John from behind. Chicken parmesan, your favorite. You spoil me. I like spoiling you. John leaned back into the embrace. How was your day? Good. Better now that I'm home with you. John turned in his arms, smiling that soft smile that Kyle loves so much. I have news. Good news or bad news? Good news. I talked to my boss today about taking Friday off next week for the trip to see my parents. Kyle felt a flutter of nervousness mixed with pride. And? He said yes, so we're really doing this. I'm really going to tell them. Kyle studied John's face, looking for signs of doubt or fear, but found only determination. How are you feeling about it? Nervous? Excited? Ready? John's hands came up to rest on Kyle's chest. I'm ready to stop hiding who I am. I'm ready for them to know about you, about us. What if they don't take it well? Then we'll deal with that together too. John's expression grew fierce. But Kyle, I need you to know something. No matter what happens with my family, no matter how anyone reacts, it doesn't change how I feel about you. It doesn't change my commitment to this relationship. Kyle felt his throat tighten with emotion. I know. I just don't want you to lose your family because of me. I'm not losing them because of you. If I lose them, it'll be because they can't accept who I really am. And that's their choice, not yours. Kyle leaned forward to rest his forehead against John's, breathing in the familiar scent of his cologne mixed with the smell of dinner cooking. I love you, Kyle said softly. I love how brave you are, how sure you are about us. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. They ate dinner by candlelight, a habit they'd developed over the past few months. John had surprised Kyle one evening with candles and flowers, saying he wanted their regular dinners to feel special, to acknowledge that they were building something meaningful together. Tell me about your day, John said, as he always did, genuinely interested in every detail of Kyle's life. Kyle talked about his classes, his research, the progress on his thesis. John listened with the focused attention he'd always given Kyle, but now there was an added layer of intimacy to it. The way John's eyes never left his face. The way John reached across the table to touch his hand when he mentioned something stressful. And what about your day? Kyle asked in return. Productive. I finished the Morrison account, started the new campaign for the restaurant chain. Oh, and I called my sister. Kyle's eyebrows rose. John hadn't spoken to his sister Nancy in weeks, not since he'd started questioning his sexuality. How did that go? Better than expected. I told her I was bringing someone home to meet the family next weekend. Did you tell her it was me? I told her it was my partner. I didn't specify gender, but I think she might have guessed. She asked if it was someone she'd met, and when I said yes, she got quiet for a minute. Kyle felt a flutter of anxiety. What kind of quiet? Thoughtful quiet, not upset quiet. Then she said she was looking forward to seeing us both, and that she hoped whoever it was made me happy. That sounds promising. I think so too. Nancy's always been the most open-minded of my siblings. If anyone's going to be supportive, it'll be her. They finished dinner and settled on the couch, John pulling Kyle against his side in their customary position. Kyle never got tired of this. The simple pleasure of being held by the person he loved, of feeling completely safe and cherished. Kyle, John said softly, his fingers playing with Kyle's hair. Do you ever think about the future? About what our life might look like in 5 years? 10 years? Kyle tilted his head to look up at John, seeing something vulnerable and hopeful in his expression. All the time. What do you think about? I think about us having our own place, something that's really ours instead of just a shared apartment. I think about maybe getting a dog, one of those big golden retrievers that would take up half the couch. Kyle smiled. I love golden retrievers. I know you do. I think about Sunday mornings where we don't have anywhere to be, where we can just stay in bed and read the paper and drink coffee. I think about holidays with both our families, about them all getting along and accepting us. What else? John's voice grew softer, more tentative. I think about maybe getting married someday, if that's something you'd want. I think about making it official, making promises in front of everyone we love. Kyle's breath caught. They'd never talked about marriage before, though Kyle had certainly thought about it during quiet moments when he let himself imagine their future together. Is that something you'd want? Kyle asked carefully. With you? Yeah, I want everything with you. The whole traditional life, just with the person I actually love, instead of the person I thought I was supposed to love. Kyle sat up, turning to face John fully. John, are you asking me something specific or are we just talking hypothetically? John's cheeks flushed slightly. Right now we're talking hypothetically, but someday when we're ready, when the time is right, I'd like it to be more than hypothetical. Kyle felt his heart swell with love and joy. I'd like that too. I'd like all of it. The house, the Sunday mornings, the marriage, all of it, with you. John's smile was radiant. Yeah? Yeah, I've been dreaming about a future with you since long before I thought it was possible. Now that it is possible, now that we're really doing this, I want everything we can have together. John cupped Kyle's face in his hands, thumbs brushing across his cheekbones. I love you so much. I love that we want the same things. I love that we're building this together. I love you too. More than I ever thought it was possible to love someone. John kissed him then, soft and deep and full of promise. When they broke apart, both breathing heavily, John rested his forehead against Kyle's. "So we're really doing this," John said softly, "building a whole life together. We're really doing this. I can't wait to see what comes next." Kyle smiled, feeling more content and hopeful than he'd ever felt in his life. "Whatever comes next, we'll figure it out together." "Together," John agreed, and Kyle heard in that single word all the love and commitment and promise of their future stretching out ahead of them. 6 months later, Kyle stood in the kitchen of their new apartment, the one with the big windows and the extra bedroom that John had insisted they needed for when people visit, though Kyle suspected it was really for the home office John wanted to set up. Sunlight streamed across the hardwood floors, illuminating the boxes they still hadn't unpacked, the life they were still building together piece by piece. John appeared in the doorway, hair mussed from assembling furniture, wearing one of Kyle's old college t-shirts and a satisfied smile. "The bed's finally put together," John announced, moving to wrap his arms around Kyle from behind as he stood at the coffee maker. "Only took me 3 hours and 2 trips to the hardware store." "My hero," Kyle said, leaning back into the embrace. "What's next on the list?" "I was thinking we could tackle the bookshelf, but honestly, I'm more interested in testing out that bed we just assembled." Kigal laughed, turning in John's arms. "We have all afternoon for that, and all evening, and all night." "I like the sound of that." John's expression grew softer, more serious. "I still can't believe this is our place, really ours." Kyle looked around the kitchen, taking in the morning light, the coffee cups on the counter, the refrigerator covered with photos of them together, and magnets from places they'd visited. It felt like home in a way their old shared apartment never quite had, because this space was intentionally theirs, chosen together, filled with their combined dreams and plans. "I can't believe it either," Kyle admitted. 6 months ago, I was still trying to figure out how to tell you I loved you. Now we're living together, officially, with a lease and everything. "And my parents send you birthday cards," John added with a grin. Kyle smiled, remembering the surprise of receiving a card from John's mother just last week, signed it "Love Mom and Dad Thompson," as if he'd always been part of the family. John's coming out to his parents had been difficult at first, tears and confusion and long conversations, but they'd come around faster than either Kyle or John had dared to hope. His father had even pulled Kyle aside during their last visit to thank him for making John so happy. "Your sister still texts me directly instead of going through you," Kyle pointed out. "Nancy always did like you better than me. Now she just doesn't have to pretend otherwise." They'd settled into a comfortable rhythm over the past months, navigating the challenges of John's coming out with patience and love. There had been difficult moments, conversations with friends and colleagues who didn't understand, the occasional stare or comment from strangers. But there had been far more moments of joy and acceptance, of friends who celebrated their relationship, of family members who welcomed Kyle with open arms. "I love our life," John said softly, echoing Kyle's thoughts. "I love waking up next to you every morning and coming home to you every night. I love that we have our own space now, our own routines, our own traditions." "What traditions?" Kyle asked, amused. "Coffee in bed on Sunday mornings, farmers market on Saturdays, movie nights on Fridays, cooking dinner together every night we're both home." Kyle realized John was right. Without consciously planning it, they developed rituals that made their life together feel solid and intentional. "I love our traditions too," Kyle said. "I love how domestic we've become." "Domestic and disgustingly happy," John agreed. "I saw Mrs. Chen from downstairs yesterday, and she said we make her believe in true love again." Kyle laughed. "We are pretty sickeningly cute together." "The sickest," John said solemnly, then broke into a grin. "I wouldn't have it any other way." Kyle stood on his toes to kiss him, still marveling at how natural it felt. How right. Even after all these months, every kiss still sent warmth flooding through his chest, still made him feel like the luckiest person alive. "So," John said when they broke apart, "bed assembly, testing, or bookshelf construction?" "Bookshelf," Kyle decided. "If we test the bed now, we'll never get anything else done today." "Fair point, but I'm holding you to that later." "I'm counting on it." They spent the afternoon unpacking books and arranging them on their new shelves, debating the merits of organizing by author versus subject, laughing at the books they'd both owned and now had duplicates of. Kyle found himself watching John more than focusing on the task, struck by how happy and relaxed he looked, how comfortable he'd become in his own skin. "What are you staring at?" John asked, catching him looking. "Just you. Just thinking about how much you've changed since we got together." Changed how? Kyle considered how to put it into words. "You're more yourself now, if that makes sense. More confident, more open. Like you've finally given yourself permission to be who you really are." John's expression grew thoughtful. "I feel like I have. For the first time in my life, I'm not trying to be someone else's version of who I should be. I'm just being me, and that's enough." "It's more than enough. It's everything." John set down the book he'd been holding and moved closer to Kyle, cupping his face gently. "You know what the best part is?" "What?" "The best part is that I get to be myself with the person I love most in the world. I get to be completely honest about who I am and what I want, and you love me anyway." "Not anyway," Kyle corrected softly. "Because of who you are. I love you because you're brave enough to be yourself, because you chose to stop hiding, because you chose me even when it was scary." "It's not scary anymore," John said. "Loving you is the easiest thing I've ever done." Kyle felt tears prick at his eyes, overwhelmed by the depth of love in John's voice, by the certainty and peace in his expression. "I love you too," Kyle whispered. "So much that sometimes I can't believe this is real, that we're really here together." "We're really here," John confirmed, pressing a soft kiss to Kyle's forehead. "And we're going to be here for a very long time. Promise?" "I promise. I promise. I'll love you every day for the rest of my life. I promise I'll never stop being grateful that you waited for me to figure myself out. I promise I'll spend forever trying to make you as happy as you make me." Kyle launched himself forward, wrapping his arms around John's neck and kissing him with all the love and gratitude and joy that filled his heart. John caught him easily, holding him close, and Kyle thought about how far they'd come from that night when John had asked if they could eat dinner together, how a simple request had opened the door to everything they had now. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, John smiled that brilliant smile that Kyle loved so much. "So," John said, "ready to test out that bed now?" Kyle laughed, feeling lighter and happier than he'd ever thought possible. "I thought you'd never ask." As John led him toward their bedroom, Kyle reflected on the journey that had brought them here, from roommates to friends to lovers to partners building a life together. It had taken courage from both of them, patience and honesty, and the willingness to risk everything for the chance at real love. But standing here in their new apartment, surrounded by the life they'd built together, Kyle knew that every moment of uncertainty had been worth it. Every day of waiting, every night of wondering, every leap of faith had led them to this moment, to this love, to this future stretching out ahead of them, full of infinite possibility. Sometimes the most beautiful love stories were the ones that caught you completely off guard, the ones that bloomed from friendship and grew into something deeper than either person had dared to imagine. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, the person you'd been secretly loving was secretly loving you back, just waiting for the courage to say so. Kyle had found that courage, and so had John, and now they were exactly where they both belonged, together.